If someone had told me 20 years ago that I'd be more interested in seeing Thor 3 than the first Justice League movie, I probably would have helped them inside because they'd clearly been out in the sun too long. But here we are. DC has been inspired by Marvel's big screen success, less creatively than financially, I fear, and they've been playing catch up with Marvel ever since. Justice League is the fifth DC cinematic universe so far, and because Justice League is a direct continuation of the first two, just want to touch on them to get to where we are now. There was Man of Steel, which was horrific, and my aggressive criticisms of this movie became somewhat legendary among my friends, eventually in a "are you really still on about this" sort of way. Then came the rather cumbersomely titled Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, which was not really that much of an improvement, and which I refer to as the previous movie simply because the next two fall outside the main sequence of events. Third was Suicide Squad, which I haven't seen, but the general consensus seemed to be better, but not good enough. Then came Wonder Woman, the only clear success of the series. And now Justice League. I found Justice League to be a bit better than the other movies that Superman has appeared in, though I'm not sure how much of that was simply my much lower expectations from when I started. But then again, lowered expectations didn't help me with Batman vs. Superman, so I think there has been some genuine improvement here. I didn't hate this movie, and it never left me rolling my eyes or grumbling, "oh, come on." But it never really grabbed me the way that a really entertaining or engaging movie does. The villain of this film is Steppenwolf, one of the New Gods. The movie doesn't really get into much detail about what the New Gods are, so I won't either, but suffice it to say that even within the context of the comics, he's essentially a creature of irredeemable evil. There's not a lot of detail provided beyond that, so he is fairly paper thin as a villain, but that didn't bother me all that much. I mean, really, in the Marvel movies, was there really all that much more depth to Malekith or Aldrich Killian? Do you even remember Aldrich Killian? Exactly. Steppenwolf in the movie intends to reunite three mother boxes, energy sources of the New Gods that are incredibly powerful computers that can be used to create or destroy. And the three were separated millennia earlier during his failed attempt to conquer Earth, and now he's having a second go at it. He retrieves the first from Paradise Island, home of Wonder Woman, and the second from Atlantis, home of Aquaman, and the only thing keeping him from getting the third is the fledgling, still under construction Justice League. So let's talk about the Justice League. There's Wonder Woman, who had her own excellent movie after appearing in Batman vs. Superman, and she's well established. There's Batman, who is okay, I guess, so you have to accept a Batman who is okay with guns and routinely shoots at things and often people, and who says that if there's an even 1% chance that a person is a threat, that he has to treat it as an absolute certainty, because apparently he studied under Dick Cheney at some point. But really, everyone knows who Batman is, so there's no issues there. So we've got the three newcomers, Aquaman, Flash, and Cyborg. We actually did see them in the previous film, and there was the as yet unexplained appearance of Flash in a lightning field sending a message back through time to Batman, but sending it back further than he'd intended. But other than that, the three characters weren't even on the periphery of the movie, or someone briefly stumbled across in a chance encounter. They more or less stopped the ongoing movie for several minutes while a character watched YouTube clips of the three, which serves less as an introduction than as an advertisement. Other than knowing they exist and that little bit that we saw in the previous movie, they show up in this movie pretty much as blank slates that we know nothing about. So we'll start with Aquaman. Batman and Superman are established characters, and everyone knows them and generally likes them, so there's a bit of leeway with them. On the other hand, Aquaman is generally seen as something of a joke. His costume is an orange shirt and green pants. He talks to fish. He never really fits in or has a clear role. We know the enemy's base is around here somewhere, and we have to find it. Aquaman, go check the harbor. You know, the challenge of creating a credible character out of one often perceived as a joke is not an inconsiderable one, but I think they pulled it off pretty well. They ditched the classic outfit, which I initially was against, saying it was a bad sign that I wouldn't have recognized the character as Aquaman without the caption on the photo, but I've kind of come around on that, and I'd have to say it's a good choice. The character does still remain the biggest cipher of the three, however. It's hinted at that he has much greater responsibilities in Atlantis, but we're only there long enough to kick the story along. thank goodness for that. They didn't need to do another huge extended action sequence like they did on Paradise Island. You know, 2 in a row would have been a bit much. But other than him being gruff and not entirely sold on the idea of the Justice League, we really don't get too much of a sense of who he is. And next comes Cyborg, who I probably have the least to say about. We're kind of hamstrung on appreciating his character arc because we don't know who he was before his father used a mother box to try to save his life. We see photos of Victor Stone before the accident, but we don't actually see him or who he was or how he acted. So the man that we encounter is dark and broody and self-pitying and basically a typical Zack Snyder superhero. The fact that we've never really seen him before this movie also sets up the unfortunate movie trope of having a villain with a plan to do terrible things, and a character we meet for the first time whose abilities are pretty much ideally suited to countering that exact plan. It's not that Cyborg comes off as bad, it's just not really clear to me why he's in the Justice League beyond Batman just grabbing up anyone with any sort of superhuman ability whatsoever and bringing them together and hoping for the best. I mean, he's bringing in a member who is comprised of the same technology their enemy is using, who attacked Superman because he couldn't control that technology, who was even called out by Aquaman, who referred to a member of the team who they can't be sure isn't the enemy. From a logic standpoint, it's not clear that he's actually an asset and not a huge liability, but this is how movies work. And last is the Flash, who's probably the best defined character out of the three, with a motivation to get his innocent father out of jail and working 3 jobs to do so. He's also very clearly the comic relief in the movie, sometimes painfully so. It's not clear how he afforded a suit made out of space shuttle materials or how his 15-monitor computer setup was purchased, unless it was all stolen, which isn't all that heroic. But we're not supposed to wonder how characters in entertainment afford what they do. They just do. The Flash also fills the role of wide-eyed newcomer, much like Spider-Man does for Marvel. And in filling that role, he does help provide a small sense of wonder and awe that's mostly been missing from DC's movies, where the incredible and fantastic are treated as routine or even burdens. You know, these are superheroes, incredible people doing incredible things, and he seems to be the only one who notices. What all 3 of them have in common and suffer from is a lack of time to establish who they are. Introducing them in the team-up movie eliminates any chance to go deep into any of their characters, so we get a quick scene or 2 to say hi, and then they just become part of the plot for the most part. There's no time to build up a new character, or much less 3 of them. They really would have been better served by having their own introductory movies first, but then that's not the route the studio chose, and it hurts the characters. Of course, introductory movies only work if they're done right, which this studio generally has not accomplished. Specifically, Superman, because the Wonder Woman movie was great, but Superman, not so much. The hard sell in this movie on how admired and revered Superman is by the world at large has been by far the most impossible thing for me to swallow about this entire cinematic universe. His introduction to the world in Man of Steel involved the leveling of much of Metropolis and a massive death count, during which, in one of the least heroic things that any version of Superman has ever done, he flew over the crater that was Metropolis, skyscrapers still burning all around him, and instead of searching for survivors and trying to help people, he started kissing Lois Lane above the ashes of the dead. For this, we discovered by the next movie that people have actually built statues to him. There's a montage of him helping people in the movie, but it feels tacked on. See, he's saving people, problem solved. But when the movie pretends to address the complaints about Superman by having him testify before Congress about the battle in Metropolis, they act like they're actually going to address this issue. But he arrives, he doesn't say a word, and then a bomb goes off, killing everyone in the room. And again, rather than search for wounded or try to rescue people at the fringes of the explosion, he stands in the raging inferno with a sad, self-pitying, why do things like this always happen to me look on his face. He watched a massive firefight between Batman and criminals through the streets of Gotham with explosions and people getting hurt, and he stayed back and waited for the fight to come to him and then talked tough to Batman rather than jumping in and ending the fight and reducing injuries and fatalities. His father told him that maybe he should let people die to protect his secret, and his mother told him that he owes the world absolutely nothing. He doesn't act heroic, he's not told that he should be heroic. As my friend Steve put it, this version of character just absolutely hates being Superman. So when this movie begins with stories about a huge increase in crime and a decrease in public morale worldwide in the wake of Superman's death, I just don't buy it. The comic book Superman? Absolutely. Reeves Superman? Yes. Ralph's Superman? Sure. Dean Cain's Superman? Why not? Welling's pre-Superman? Sometimes, I guess, maybe. But Cavill's Superman hasn't earned it, not with anything that we've ever seen. I don't buy that people are this torn up over this Superman's death, and I don't buy that he's needed that badly, considering he was introduced in one movie and then died in the next. We're told he is, but in two movies we've never seen it. That's why this part of Justice League plays badly through no fault of its own. If the two earlier appearances by Superman had been as good as the Wonder Woman movie, then this would have played much better and been far more believable. So on one hand, the movie is trying to build on something that's not there, which is a huge problem. But on the other hand, I'm not sure how fair it is to judge this movie based on the failures of the earlier movies. And this movie does do some things right. I think it would be unfair to say that the parts that I feel were done right came mostly from Joss Whedon's reshoots, while the problems remain Zack Snyder's doing, though I admit that hasn't stopped me from being mostly unfair. Snyder mostly sees heroes as macho men doing macho things, namely being humorless piles of muscles that hit similarly macho villains and cause massive property damage. And his first two movies were largely criticized for being dark and humorless. This doesn't hold as true in this movie. The Flash brings some much needed levity and humanity to the cinematic universe. Characters sometimes smile and joke. We actually see Superman laugh after making a joking comment, perhaps a rather macabre comment in context, but nonetheless, a joke from this Superman. Never seen that before. And in a credits stinger, we see Superman having fun with his powers and having fun with being Superman for probably the first time ever, the possible exception being the learning to fly scene in Man of Steel. This movie takes the previous movie's "Do You Bleed" line that was widely and deservedly mocked and derided, and turns it around, and then manages to make a joke out of it that made me snort in my theater seat, not because it was especially funny, but simply because it was so unexpected, and I'm positive that Snyder wasn't responsible for that. We see Superman go through his entire list of powers without any of them feeling especially tacked on, and we have a villain who, in the end, the heroes do not kill, which I approve of because that is a very typical thing in movies, and it's a very lazy form of writing, and not just in superhero movies. They don't dwell over long on Steppenwolf acquiring the mother boxes, which is good because it's a given that he's going to manage it anyway, and leaving him alive in the end leaves the option for him to come back in a later movie and be a bit less of a cipher and to create a connection to earlier, which is important in an interconnected universe like this. It needs connections so that each movie doesn't feel completely isolated from the next. But my favorite scene in this entire movie was a fairly early one between Batman and Flash, just before the first big confrontation with Steppenwolf. The Flash pulls Batman aside and lists some things he's afraid of, and then admits he's never really been in a fight before. He says, "I just push people and run away," which is a rather funny deconstruction of the character and how he operates. And Batman responds to this not by giving him a rah-rah speech or trying to guilt him or anything grandiose. Instead, he sets a very small goal. He tells Flash, "Save one person. Just one." And that's it. And once the fight starts, Flash steals himself and runs in and pulls someone out, then realizes there's plenty more hostages in there and he can get them out as well. And he does it. Batman just gives him the smallest of goals and counts on him to figure it out from there that he can do so much more. Batman lets Flash find his own confidence and motivation. It's a great moment because it's so reasonable and it's so understated. And it was probably my favorite moment in the entire movie. Less understated, however, is the CGI. And while I thank the story of this movie's production for introducing the term contractually obligated mustache into the lexicon, I didn't really have a problem with the CGI work on Cavill's face, and being aware of it in advance, I was looking for it. Batman's CGI spider tank, for want of a better term, looked okay, but did carry with it an air of, why does he even have this thing? I had more of a problem with scenes like Aquaman crashing down through the building and coming out on his feet as though nothing had happened. When a building got destroyed in Age of Ultron, when Iron Man and Hulk crashed through it, it looked like a building actually getting destroyed. When Aquaman crashed through the building, it looked like CGI from which an actor emerged against a green screen. Honestly, most of the battle at the end took place in a region where everything was tinted heavily orange, which I suppose is meant to be evocative of hell, with Steppenwolf essentially trying to create a hell on Earth. And it makes sense, but it also gave everything an artificial look that made it less impressive. The intentionally unnatural lighting made the setting look unnatural and somewhat detached it from reality. Somehow the CGI throughout the movie often looked expensive and fake, which is an interesting feat. I'm not quite sure how they accomplished it. So, last, a few checklist points before we get to the end here. Superman has now fought with and tried to kill other superheroes in 2 out of the 3 movies, and in the third one, he was the only superhero who appeared. Lois Lane in this movie did not fall from a great height only to be caught by Superman and saved from certain death. That had happened in the previous 2 movies, so that's 2 for 3 as well. This is also the second time in 3 movies where Lois sees Superman and clearly refers to him as Clark in front of total strangers. This is the first time that Superman actually took a time out from dealing with the big baddie in order to rescue innocent people. Actually, all the innocent people in the village were represented by a single family of 4 who Superman didn't actually rescue. Flash did. But there's apparently an apartment building of people who Superman did save, unless he was saving an empty building. He's certainly done more questionable things than that. And they even lightened Superman's outfit, making the colors a bit brighter, which is a nice subtle concession that it's been a bit too dark, and trying to portray Superman as the Punisher was a mistake. We do see Commissioner Gordon for the first time, and it's not really clear why he's around or what purpose he serves. We see Alfred for the second movie in a row, and the same goes for him. In the Christian Bale movies, Michael Caine's Alfred was Bruce's humanity when Bruce was going too far into being Batman. Jeremy Irons' Alfred seems to be little more than a vaguely sarcastic mission control. So, after all of that, would I recommend the movie? No, maybe it's fairly mindless action fare. It's definitely an improvement, which I still suspect is largely related to Zack Snyder's smaller influence on the film after the unfortunate tragedy in his personal life. There has been a solid inverse relationship between how involved Snyder is in the movie and how good it is. The movie he had the least hand in was Wonder Woman, which is by far the best. Justice League, compared to its 2 precursors, Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, is clearly a step in the right direction, but they're still not where they should be or where they need to be. They'll have plenty of time to get it right, because I'm certain that the studio isn't going to stop making these movies anytime soon, because there's a ton of money to be made if they can ever figure it out. And the studio will keep trying. I mean, there's been 6 Transformers movies. You know that they're not going to shelve Batman and Superman this quickly. In the meantime, DC's best finally appeared on the big screen together for the very first time, and it was totally adequate, which is far from great and far from what fans deserve, but at least they're slowly moving in the right direction. Maybe they'll eventually get to the point where the overwhelming response is "that was great" instead of "that could have been worse." Hope springs eternal. Oh, hello, Cat. So, would you like to be in the video? Do you have any insights into Justice League you'd like to share with the world at large? No? Anything? No? You just want to get down? That's what I figured.